This is the Impact Report. I'm your host, Katie Ellman. The Impact Report brings together students and faculty in Bard College's MBA in Sustainability program with leaders in business, sustainability, finance, social entrepreneurship, and more. These conversations go live the first and third Friday of each month. This week, Bard MBA's Hung Tran speaks with Roger Bason, CEO and founder of Atlantic Ocean Aquaculture.
My name is Hung Tran, and I am a second-year part-time MBA student at Bard. I've been deeply interested in seaweed and aquaculture since I learned about it in high school, and I believe that it is important to talk about as one of the tools for tackling climate change. Today, I'll be interviewing Roger Bason, who is the CEO and founder of Atlantic Ocean Aquaculture, which I'll refer to as AOA from now on. Roger was trained in ocean science at Colgate University and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and has taught ocean sustainability at the Columbia University School of International Public Affairs and the Harvard Graduate School of Design. For the past 5 years, he has focused on climate action, installing several offshore seaweed farms and wild seaweed harvest in New England. Present work focuses on the harvest of Asparagopsis in Europe, which is a red seaweed that reduces methane in cattle when used as a feed supplement. So the goal of AOA is scaling production to reduce ag sector greenhouse gases in the US and abroad. Roger, thank you so much for joining us today on the Impact Report.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Hung. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I guess, just jumping right in, methane is responsible for around 30% of the rise in global temperature since the Industrial Revolution. And rapid and sustained reductions in methane emissions are key to limit near-term warming and improve air quality. So I guess, what inspired you to found this company?
Well, the climate action factor was key. I have been working, and what I taught at Columbia, the CPO, years ago was the ocean energy, which I thought was a good vehicle, to use the tides and the wave energy in a very carbon-free way to produce electricity and, reduce fossil fuels. But that, as a business model, was difficult. It took about 10 years to permit the first site in the East River in New York City. And that's a tough one for investors and a business model to move forward. So I got a bit frustrated, and I started to think of what could I do here with the climate issue being such a huge part of the future. And I had some background in ocean science and this type of thing. So I was reading Drawdown, which is sort of an epic work in the field. And one of them focused on seaweed. And it was Brian von Herzen who runs the Climate Foundation. And I later met with him. He came up to my seaweed farms in Maine. And, I saw that, this was one way to approach carbon. The seaweed captures carbon from the water, so it reduces ocean acidification, and can also be used as a product in many different ways to sell as a way to support the whole positive effort. So in a nutshell, that's the inspiration right there.
Awesome. That sounds great. And I guess, how did you hear specifically about the Asparagopsis red seaweed strain that can reduce methane emissions in cows? Because that sounds like almost like a kind of cheat code to tackling the climate change issue.
Yes. Well, Asparagopsis, a beautiful red seaweed, and very abundant. It exists in about 60 countries worldwide in the Pacific and also in Atlantic countries on every continent. So it's a very abundant seaweed. I happened to be in Gran Canaria in the Canary Islands on a family vacation, and circumstances were such that I had to catch up and read on some seaweeds. And they tested that Asparagopsis. They tested all the seaweeds. One of them was Asparagopsis. And it turns out it was like a cure-all. It ticked every box for anti-cancer, antibacteria, antiviral, many different healing pharmaceutical qualities. And so I got interested in it. And then I read that research in Australia and New Zealand indicated they tested just a little fraction, like 0.5% of the daily feed for cattle. And the cattle produce about 44% of the global methane, cattle and the other ruminants, 3 billion of them. And they, most of it burps out the front end because of the way their digestive system works. And they're responsible for an enormous amount of methane. And methane is more toxic than carbon dioxide. It's 86 times as potent a greenhouse gas, but it doesn't last as long. So they monetize it at about a factor of 28 times. So 1 ton of methane is equal to 28 tons of carbon dioxide. And so this is a very useful product because of all these pharmaceutical benefits. Is good for cattle health. It improves their productivity, their weight gain, feed conversion is, they use less feed to gain more weight, and it also reduces methane. So there's an economic and a climate benefit for using it as cattle feed. We actually all should be eating this because it's good for so many different things. But this is one way to sort of monetize and get a business model. As an MBA student, I'm sure you can appreciate this, that you get a business model that's actually doing, multiple benefits and enabling a profitable enterprise to reduce methane and attack the climate issue.
And I want to, I guess, circle back to one thing you mentioned. You said that, so the cows only need to be fed a tiny sliver of this daily, not like a large harvest every single time, just a small amount?
Yeah, well, what's so is, most cattle, beef or dairy cattle, it works for both, they eat about 15 to 20 kilos of grain or grass, per day. Mm-hmm. When they're in a feedlot or in a barn, you can add this as a supplement. And right now we're testing, coming up with really the ag sector climate solution for the country of Norway to meet their Paris Climate Accords. They want to reduce they have 1 million cattle, and they want to reduce so many metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent according to their protocol. So yeah, we're helping them to devise the best ways to feed as an oil or a powder, and how to introduce this. They use just as small as 0.2% of their daily feed. So it's about 50 grams, 75 grams versus the 20 kilograms that they eat. And that can reduce the methane up to 98% in cattle. So it's an amazing plant. It has a incredible chemistry, and it is very effective in this area.
That sounds absolutely amazing. And you mentioned that it's available in, I guess, around 60 countries.
Well, it grows. It's not cultivated there yet, but it has the potential, to be a global response here. Yeah.
So I guess along with that line, why isn't this happening everywhere? Why hasn't it been grown in those 60s yet?
Well, I appreciate this interview because this is one way to inform people, of the value of this seaweed. And I know you're interested in it. It's very tough to grow it. Mm-hmm. Because of the complexity of its reproductive cycle. So we wild harvest it. And, I have experience with that. We have a team really out of New York that goes over, we cooperate. We harvest it in Portugal right now, but that's because we have connections, and it grows wild there. It forms enormous harvests. And these are like blooms that all of a sudden cover the whole shoreline. So it's in Europe, it's a invasive alien species. It's native to the Pacific. And so while we harvest it wild, we help restore the local ecosystem in Portugal. And we also have this saleable product. We're trying to, inform people about this, certainly get investors behind this. And also it's an ocean to farm cycle. Mm-hmm. Through a transportation network, right, to get this. So we're working with, farms and innovative farmers to utilize this. And you probably know some farmers. They're slow to try new things. There's a business as usual kind of thing, and it's not the simplest thing to harvest because of the permits and all the rest. So it's a work in progress, and we're getting a great start. And I think it has enormous potential for some quick action, really a rapid way to affect climate change. Because the day after we harvest it, we process it, and then it can be fed to cattle. So it's a very quick process, and as soon as they eat it, it has an impact. So it's a effective tool.
And is it okay if like the cattle eats it like the seaweed is dried and like it's fed to them like 3 months down the line? Is the seaweed still effective? Do we know?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question, and that's what we're testing right now, which really goes to the shelf life and the form in which it's delivered. So we're looking at 3 or 4 different options, in a powder that can capture the active ingredients, in oils, a freeze dry, different approaches, and to look exactly at that question, which is, okay, does the active ingredient, it's a bromoform compound, does the active ingredient remain in there, or and what is the shelf life? So that's, this morning speaking to Norway, we were dealing exactly with the question you asked.
Fantastic. And I guess one of my last questions about seaweed, what type of growing method do you use, and about how much do you harvest a year, would you say?
Well, what we're looking at, we're scaling right now. What we want to do is scale to about 280 metric tons of wet weight seaweed. And we have a vessel in Portugal with a 5-man crew, and they can accommodate that in about 2 or 3 months, just working like 20 days a month. So 2 or 3 months during the harvest season, we can harvest that, and that's good for about 15,000 cattle to be dosed every day of the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then each cow produces about 3 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So we're getting close to 50,000 metric tons of carbon per year that's captured with a 1 boat and a 3-month harvest, right? So that's the scale we're working on for 2023. Yeah.
Gotcha. And how big would you say your team is, and how has it grown and scaled?
Well, that's a good question. We work with a team here in the US. We have strategic partners in Norway and also in Portugal. In the US, we work with a NYSERDA group, which is good to know about. It's called the EIR program, which stands for Entrepreneurs in Residence. So Joan Snyder and Thomas Boyd are both experts in their field of grant writing and agricultural activities. So we utilize them, in weekly meetings. We have divers in New York State that travel to Portugal and work with the Portuguese there. In Norway, we work with the Life Sciences University and a group called TINA, which is the agricultural collective or cooperative for Norway, and that includes 9,000 farms, 9,000 dairy farms. So that's the team, and they are testing, and we're collaborating on that. So we have scientists, in this ag area of food and feed and measurement of the methane reductions and this type of thing. And then in Portugal, we work with the medical school in Lisbon that looks at the pharmaceutical qualities. We extract the bromoform, which they don't want in the pharmaceutical. And then we have all this, like 95% of the biomass for pharmaceutical use and food and other uses. So that's it. It's like a 3-nation team, and it's an international collaboration at the moment.
Sweet. And I guess along those lines, are there any markets that you're excited about tapping into in the future?
Yeah, there's the one we're working on at this point is beef feedlots. You know, in the U.S., actually, the U.S. has about 1 million cattle. Sorry, U.S. has 100 million cattle, and about 12 million are in a feedlot at any point in time. You know, in the U.S., they're on the open range, right? When they eat grass and stuff, you can't get the supplement to them. But when they come in for fattening for like 3 or 4 months a year, the beef feedlots is a very good focus. China also has about 1 million cattle as well. So it's a very similar scale. Countries like India and Brazil each have about 300 million. So anyway, these are the kinds of scales, and our target is really by 2030 to hit 1 million cattle. And I know you asked a question earlier about in writing about how that scales financially, and if we charge the farmers 50 cents a dose, a USD, United States currency, then the product sales for 1 million cattle is about $180 million a year. But the carbon value, even if it was the same as, you know, the peak of the carbon market in Europe was about $100 per metric ton of carbon. If that existed into the future here, into 2030, that would amount to $300 million a year. So it's a reasonable target. It's a doable goal, and that's what we hope to accomplish.
Okay. And what type of impacts have you seen with your work? Like, has anything come out yet that you're like especially proud of?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're working in Norway. We have a target to comply, to enable the nation to comply with their Paris Climate Accords by 2030. So that's a target. And that is helped by the fact that the Asparagopsis in the European Union, the EU, is certified as a livestock feed in Europe. In the US, it's a different story. So we're trying to bring this to the US, and we're working with some of the large agricultural groups and farmers here in the Hudson Valley as well to trial this and to get this through the FDA and USDA and all the different, so that it's certified and safe. This has been tested in Australia, New Zealand, UC Davis in California, and basically, if the dose is correct and very small, like 1% or less, it's like enormous health benefit for the cattle. All of these positive values, they're mammals like us, so they get all these natural prebiotics or natural 100% natural antibiotics, which improve their health, their overall productivity, which is how we sell it to the ag sector. You're going to gain more weight and have more profit from your animals, and by the way, you're also doing a good thing for the climate, and you're reducing the methane, which is measurable and has, we share some of the value of the carbon credit with people who participate. Yeah.
And in your talks with like farmers and ag groups, has there ever been any like pushback on this idea, or are they like generally well receptive to it?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, as you might gather. It tends to be more younger or natural innovators are very curious and want to get on board. First, almost everybody knows about it. I mean, our work in Norway, I was talking with this ag group in Wyoming, and they heard about that stuff over there in Norway. So, and we were on the NPR of Norway with a televised program, and so the response was mixed. Some of the old farmers like, well, why are they putting that on us and this type of thing? And others were like, wow, this is a great way to, change, because business as usual will not solve the climate problem. It's getting worse. So changes have to be made. And my point of view is that everybody needs to participate, not only fossil fuels, but the ag sector, the consumers, products, product design. Across the board, there are great opportunities here to participate in this change and transformation that every society is going to have to make. Otherwise, the negative impacts of the climate are already being felt. I mean, they're significant.
Mhm. And I was also thinking about this from as like I guess a marketing aspect for some of the ad groups, like, oh, if you buy our beef at the store, you can rest like guilty free conscious. It's 98% carbon free. It's kind of like
Spot on. No, I think that's exactly right. With the Wyoming group, they also have about 1 million cattle out there in Wyoming. To advertise green beef, that this is. I mean, a lot of people know that the ag sector, beef, cattle, it's a heavy carbon footprint, and some sector of the population, particularly in Norway, they're very conscious about trying to do the right thing and to make this transition happen. So one thing they did, actually, I think over in Taiwan, Wyoming sent their prime beef over to the restaurants there, and then they had a little QR code on the menu. So one of the farmers who they haven't gotten the Asparagopsis yet, but they're just prime beef. They're very well cared for. They talk about 10 seconds or 20 seconds. And we'd like to do the same thing, is that along the lines of your thought there, that the green marketing, it's green beef, and it's like an organic, but it's even better than organic. This is carbon capture. This is responsible citizens. It's great, healthy stuff, but it's also good for the planet. And I think that's spot on. And little QR code is a way to bring the essence of our message directly to people that are about to eat or buying a product. So a good marketing thought there for sure.
Yeah. And I guess there's been like no side effects, I assume, for livestock when they eat it. Like they're just
That's
normal.
been very carefully studied. And of all of the studies, about a dozen or more that I've read, there's only one study that began to bring up some issues with the bromoform. And it has to do with the dosing and how the cattle are fed the food. And I think there are overwhelmingly, it's a positive benefit if it's done correctly. And it's like anything. If you have aspirin, if you take one aspirin or two, it's good for your headache. But if you had a truckload of aspirin, it'd make you sick, right? So you have to dose this properly. And in that study, what they did was feed a totally concentrated bromoform to the cattle before they ate the rest of their meal. So it was kind of like this aspirin. You would never feed them that way. You want to mix the Asparagopsis with the feed so that it represents less 1% or less. So you want to mix it, and then it's good. If you force feed and concentrate it, it's not the proper way to do it. So I think overall, healthy, good stuff, as long as it's done right. And we're all working to make sure that the animal health is first and foremost.
So Roger, you're a very busy person and you wear a lot of hats: professor, entrepreneur, etc. Can you talk us through your professional background and training, and just share some of the other projects you've worked on?
Yeah, I think it works well together. Actually, I think teaching what you know helps everybody, because it helps you to focus your thinking, organize your thoughts, communicate with people, generally younger people, and that may get interested in what you're doing. So when I worked, I was trained as an oceanographer early on at Woods Hole and Colgate. I actually took a cruise through the Panama Canal to the Galapagos Islands and did a lot of measurements out there. So I had this ocean experience, and then I got certified as an energy engineer. So ocean energy became kind of a natural result of that. I could see putting these things together, and I got connected with the the first tidal power plant in New York City, which is right there at Roosevelt Island in the East River. And that, one thing leads to another. I met some of the Russian scientists at that time that were doing work in South America. So I ended up down there again at the Galapagos and looking at ways that, how developing areas can use these new technologies. So, that's progressed and the frustration with the permitting, 10 years to permit a project is a tough one to make a business. So, I moved into the seaweed side of things. I like to swim. I like to get in the water and, scuba certified and whatnot. So those were all things that, I like to work in that environment and share that. I've probably had, over 100 interns work in my business. So connecting with the universities and working with the students is sort of a natural, and so it's worked out well. And I think it's healthy to. I don't know if I would recommend my journey to anyone else, but it's worked for me, and I think it's it's a way to keep life interesting to work in these different sectors and to understand how they support each other. Certainly your MBA and then business is kind of a similar path. It's a way to get the study side of things, but also to the practical realization of your ideas across the marketplace.
Sweet. And I guess as we are wrapping up here, do you have any other thoughts that you would like to share?
In addition to the rural application for methane reduction in cattle with seaweed supplements, there also are urban and shoreline solutions as well for biodesign and seaweed. Exactly 10 years ago, Superstorm Sandy struck New York, the metro area, with a fierce destructive intensity, causing over $40 billion worth of damage to the region. In New York City alone, over 70,000 buildings were impacted, 44 lives lost, with significant damage to property and infrastructure, from streets and highways to subways, rail, water, sewer systems, power lines. 8 million people lost power. And the storm surge and shoreline damage was huge. Record 30-foot wave heights were witnessed off the southern tip of Manhattan near Battery Park. And the key point is this: what have we learned in the past 10 years to protect city infrastructure, and how can this be done in ways that are affordable and effective? In my view, nature-based biodesign approaches have a lot to offer for New York City and coastline population centers throughout the world as a climate action defense. And this approach recovers ocean habitat. It provides sustainable long-term shoreline protection. And similar superstorms like Sandy, or what are called 100-year storms, are predicted now every 10 to 20 years. And in the near future, even more frequently, as global warming increases, having several of these superstorms per decade. And this is due to the rising ocean temperatures and increasing sea level rise. And it's particularly threatening as the global response to climate action currently lags worldwide. So seaweed with biodesign as a nature-based solution provides a lower cost, sustainable, and a job-intensive approach that's effective and efficient. Nearshore seaweed fields can form a thick biomass barrier, and if properly designed with the correct species of seaweeds, the right location, and then when securely anchored, have proven to reduce storm surge 60%. And various species of seaweed and kelps that are native to New York City, New Jersey, and Long Island have many benefits. They capture carbon, reduce ocean acidification, clean the water of toxins, and they absorb excess nutrients from runoff and fertilizers. And these seaweeds can be set up and designed to reduce shoreline damage from storm surge events at a fraction of the cost of hard breakwater infrastructure. A recent estimate, for example, for rigid movable shoreline barriers in New York Harbor was estimated at $55 billion. And the biodesign and this type of seaweed use, which is just could be achieved at a fraction of the cost. So just to summarize this, biodesign for natural seaweed biomass systems that capture carbon, they reduce ocean acidification, they moderate the pH of the oceans, absorb toxins, create marine habitat, provide jobs to design, install, and maintain these systems, and help restore urban working waterfronts worldwide, as well as providing security and greater safety for nearshore infrastructure.
Now, I have a follow-up to that. Since we are at the 10th anniversary of when Hurricane Sandy happened, this seems like the perfect time to introduce something like this to New York. But also, I'm just wondering, in your experience, in your opinion, do you think that the current climate politically is open to something like this? Do you think, a small project like this could actually expand to protect the shorelines in this city and other cities?
Absolutely. In the last month, I've spoken to both the co-chairs of the NPCC. We have internationally the IPCC, which is the International Panel for Climate Change. NPCC is the New York version that reports directly to the mayor. And I've spoken with both co-chairs that are very enthusiastic about this. New York City is asking for RFPs and funding suggestions, and we'll be responding to them along the lines of what we've just spoken about. And there is also funding from both New York State, and the Biden administration has, I think, $20 billion set aside for shoreline protection projects, throughout the United States. So there's a great opportunity. I think the timing is right, and it couldn't happen faster and with more appropriate timing than this memory of Superstorm Sandy, which they'll come again. We have to be ready.
Well, I couldn't think of a better way to wrap up the interview then. Thank you so much, Roger.
Thank you. It was a great opportunity to talk with you, and I look forward to future collaboration.
We appreciate our loyal Impact Report listeners and hope you can help us spread the word about the series and the important sustainability work of our guests. Please rate and review the Impact Report wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you were inspired by this conversation, share a screenshot on Instagram and tag Impact Report Podcast. Learn more about the topics discussed in today's episode by following Roger on LinkedIn and by visiting aoaseaweed.com. And be sure to head to greenbiz.com or impactentrepreneur.com to read a recap of our conversation. Join us for the next episode of the Impact Report on Friday, November 4th. We'll be speaking with Pavel Ramirez of Plural. Interested in learning how you can launch a high-impact, purpose-driven career in sustainability? Check out the resources page from the BARD Graduate Programs in Sustainability for access to free resources to jumpstart your career. Hear from leaders in the fields of climate change, consulting, impact finance, circular economy, and more about how they launch their careers and the tips they have for you to join their industries. Visit gps.bard.edu/resources today.